She doesn't belong here. The words cut through the hush of the cabin like a knife against glass. Cold, sharp, public. Amanda Greer, the senior flight attendant in her neatly pressed uniform and signature red lipstick, didn't even bother to lower her voice. Passengers in first class turned their heads, some with confusion, others with interest, a few with subtle smirks that seemed to say, "Finally, someone said it." But no one said a word. Not yet. Because the target of Amanda's icy judgment was just settling into seat 2A. She had placed her blazer neatly in the overhead bin. Her black leather shoes barely made a sound as she crossed her legs. And the only thing she had done was sit, quietly, confidently, and fully within her right. But for Amanda, her presence was somehow a problem. Not the boarding pass, not the seat number, not the behavior. Just her. Before we dive deeper into this story, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And if this story moves you, like and subscribe to help more unheard voices be seen. Now, back to what happened next. Something you won't forget. The woman Amanda spoke about was Dr. Maya Ellis, 38 years old, PhD in Financial Systems Reform, former Rhodes Scholar, current Vice President of Strategic Development at Altera Financial Group. But on this Thursday afternoon, dressed in a soft gray blazer, navy blouse, and slacks, she didn't look like a woman who had once testified before Congress. She looked like a woman who had worked hard, was tired, and simply needed to get to Washington, D.C. in time for her keynote speech at the National Summit on Sustainable Financial Reform. Maya traveled often, but never grew comfortable with flying. Still, she always chose first class, not for luxury, but for quiet, focus, space to breathe. And now, barely 2 minutes after buckling her seatbelt, she was being stared down like a trespasser. She turned slowly toward Amanda, unsure if she'd heard her correctly. "Excuse me?" she asked, voice low, careful. Amanda crossed her arms and leaned just slightly forward, her smile professionally fixed, but eyes hard. "Ma'am, this section is reserved for first-class passengers. If you're looking for coach, it's just back there," she said, tilting her head toward the curtain like she was directing someone to a janitor's closet. Maya reached into her small black shoulder bag, pulled out her boarding pass, and handed it forward. "Seat 2A," she said plainly. "Maya Ellis." Amanda took it, barely glancing at it before her expression twisted, something between surprise and suspicion. "Well, interesting," she muttered. "It's just, we've had a few incidents recently. People sitting in seats they didn't pay for. Happens more often than you think." Across the aisle, a white man in a tailored navy suit set down his coffee cup. He was in seat 1A, late 50s, thick silver hair, crisp demeanor, and a sense of entitlement that arrived before he did. "If she's in 2A, he said, addressing Amanda but staring directly at Maya. "I'd like to be moved. I don't feel comfortable falling asleep with my briefcase on the floor. Not after what happened to me 3 months ago." Amanda nodded quickly. "Understood, Mr. Langston. I'll see what we can arrange." Maya turned to face him. "What exactly happened 3 months ago?" she asked. Her tone wasn't angry, but firm, measured. Robert Langston barely blinked. "Flight to Phoenix. Young man sat next to me, fell asleep, woke up without my Rolex and my wallet, and he looked a lot like you." The statement hung in the air like smoke. Maya tilted her head slightly, letting the words land. "I'm sorry that happened to you," she said, "but I'm not your memory, and I'm not your thief." Amanda stepped between them quickly, her voice rising. "All right, let's not escalate. Dr. Ellis, if you wouldn't mind moving back a few rows, I'd like to de-escalate the tension up here." Maya blinked. Once, then twice. "No," she said clearly. "I would mind. I paid for this seat. I have the boarding pass. You verified my name. I'm staying right here." Amanda stiffened. "I'm asking you to cooperate." "Ma'am." Maya breathed deeply. "And I'm asking you to treat me like a paying customer, not a suspect." By now, the cabin was fully silent. Every head in first class was tilted in one direction. Phones, though still in airplane mode, were starting to record. One of them belonged to a woman in seat 3B, Olivia Reed, a popular travel vlogger and social advocate with 200,000 followers. She knew a moment when she saw one, and this was a moment. Her phone captured Amanda's voice as she turned sharply toward a younger flight attendant standing nearby. "Lena, please get ground security to meet us at the gate. We're going to need assistance." The young woman hesitated. Her name tag read Lena Torres. She looked between Amanda, Maya, and then back to the manifest in her hand. "Ma'am," she said softly. "Dr. Ellis is listed right here in 2A. The seat is confirmed. No upgrade. No mistake." Amanda didn't even glance down. "Thank you. Lena, I asked you to get security, not to read the manifest." Her voice was clipped, formal, but loaded. Maya slowly turned her head and looked out the window. She could see the wing of the plane, the airport trucks parked on the tarmac, the jet bridge just beginning to move. Her flight was scheduled to depart in exactly 18 minutes. And already, she could feel that her name, her credentials, her boarding pass. None of it mattered in that moment. What mattered was how she looked. She turned back toward Amanda. "I'm not leaving this seat, and I'm not going to argue with you. But if you choose to remove me, you'll be doing it publicly, on record, and at the expense of your own company's integrity." Amanda's jaw tensed, but she said nothing. Robert Langston muttered under his breath. Should have known this would happen, and sipped his lukewarm coffee with the flair of someone who thought the world owed him a quieter flight. Maya folded her hands in her lap, calm, unmoving. Lena glanced toward her again, uncertain, but quietly inspired. And Olivia's camera continued rolling, capturing every second. Outside, the jet bridge stopped moving. The door remained open, and somewhere in the belly of the plane, the weight of injustice shifted, just slightly, but enough to rattle the steel, because what no one realized yet was that the next 15 minutes would change the flight, the staff, and the lives of everyone watching. Silence lingered in the cabin like fog, thick, invisible, and uncomfortable. Dr. Maya Ellis remained seated in 2A, her posture composed, her hands still gently folded in her lap, while Amanda Greer stepped back, whispering sharply into her intercom, voice tense with forced control. Passengers looked away, pretending not to listen, but their ears were tuned in. Robert Langston crossed his arms, then uncrossed them, clearly agitated. He muttered something under his breath again, not to Maya, not to Amanda, but to himself, as if trying to justify his unease. "This isn't about race," he whispered, loud enough for Maya to hear. "It's about patterns, about caution." Maya didn't respond right away. She shifted slightly in her seat and turned toward him, her tone quiet but steady. "Caution rooted in fear is not the same as caution rooted in fact," she said. "And fear, when left unchecked, becomes bias." Robert gave her a long look. He wasn't used to being spoken to like that, especially not in first class, especially not by her. "You don't know what I've been through," he said. "I don't." Maya agreed. "But I know what you're doing now. You're not protecting yourself from me. You're protecting your memory of someone who wasn't me. And that's not fair to either of us." Robert shifted again, uncomfortable, but unwilling to engage further. Amanda returned with a clipboard, tapping her pen loudly. "Dr. Ellis, I'm going to ask you one final time to deboard the plane voluntarily. If you refuse, we'll have no choice but to delay departure and bring in airport security. Maya looked directly at her. And if I were a white man in this seat, she asked calmly, would you be threatening security right now? Amanda didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. From behind them, a voice spoke up. It was Lena Torres, still holding the manifest. Ma'am, please, she said, trying to be respectful but also heard. Dr. Ellis is confirmed in this seat. She's not a security risk. She's done nothing wrong. Amanda's eyes darted to Lena, sharp and dismissive. This is not your call, Torres, she snapped. Observe, don't interfere. But Lena didn't back down. Her fingers tightened on the clipboard as she looked at Maya, then back to Amanda. If we remove her, we're the ones causing the disruption, she said softly. Not her. Amanda turned fully to Lena, stepping in, her voice low but cutting. You're on probation. Don't make this the reason it ends. Maya watched the exchange in silence, her mind calm but alert. She knew power when she saw it abused, and she knew courage when it flickered inside someone who wasn't quite sure they had it. Lena had it, even if she didn't know it yet. Just then. Olivia Reed in 3B adjusted the angle of her phone. The video was still recording, and in the past 3 minutes. It had already uploaded to her cloud. She wasn't a journalist, she wasn't an activist, but something about what was happening in front of her felt too familiar, too wrong, and too important to ignore. Excuse me, Olivia said loudly enough to cut through the tension. Amanda turned to her, surprised. Yes? Olivia lifted her phone slightly. I just want to be clear. You're threatening to remove this woman, who has a paid first-class ticket, from the flight, because another passenger feels uncomfortable? Amanda's mouth opened, then closed. It's a little more nuanced than that, she said. Actually, Olivia replied, I think it's exactly as clear as that. Robert leaned forward in his seat, clearly annoyed now. Are you recording me? He barked. I'm recording all of this, Olivia replied. And so are several others. Just take a look around. Slowly, heads turned. In rows 2, 3, even row 4, a handful of passengers had their phones pointed forward. Silent witnesses capturing a moment they instinctively knew might go viral. Maya didn't ask for it. She hadn't even looked at a camera, but she had become the center of gravity in that cabin, and the plane, though still attached to the gate, felt like it was floating in the middle of something heavier than air. Amanda, sensing the shift, forced a smile. Let's all stay calm. We're working to resolve this quickly and professionally. She turned her back and walked toward the cockpit. Lena stayed where she was, still standing near Maya, still holding the manifest like a fragile shield. You okay? She asked softly. Maya gave her a small nod. I've had worse days, she said, but not many on planes. Lena gave a faint smile. It was the kind of quiet connection that didn't need explaining. A moment later, Maya's phone buzzed. Jillian. She picked up. Jillian, she whispered. Still on the plane. They haven't removed me yet, but it's escalating. On the other end, Jillian's voice was low and firm. I just spoke with SkyConnect Executive Relations. If they lay a hand on you or force you off, they'll be facing legal fire before the plane even hits the runway. Maya sighed. I hope it doesn't come to that. Jillian paused. Want me to call the captain? Not yet, Maya said. Give them a chance to do the right thing. She ended the call and looked out the window again. The ground crew had paused. The jet bridge hadn't fully retracted. They were waiting, just like everyone else. The tension wasn't just in the air anymore. It was in the steel, the carpet, the breath of every passenger. This wasn't about one seat, or one man's discomfort, or one woman's refusal. It was about what happens when power is challenged, when calm is misread as threat, when presence is seen as provocation. Amanda returned moments later, her expression unreadable now, but the way she walked, stiff, calculated, said everything. She was losing control, and she knew it. Robert sat straighter, as if preparing for a verdict. Lena didn't move. Olivia's camera stayed focused. And Maya Ellis? She simply breathed, because she had learned long ago. Silence is not submission. Stillness is not weakness. And grace, in the face of insult, is never an apology. The plane wasn't moving, but everything inside was building toward impact. The air in the first-class cabin had shifted from tension to anticipation, like passengers were holding their breath waiting for something to break. Amanda Greer stood at the front of the aisle, arms folded tight against her crisp navy uniform, her face drawn taut behind a thin, professional smile that no longer fooled anyone. Dr. Maya Ellis still sat calmly in seat 2A, unmoved, unafraid, her eyes clear and unwavering. Her boarding pass was already verified, her name confirmed, her seat assigned, but her presence, her quiet refusal to disappear, was still being treated like a disruption. Amanda stepped forward one last time. "Dr. Ellis," she said slowly, like each word was being measured out. "If you do not comply, we will be forced to remove you from the aircraft with the assistance of airport security." She said it loud enough for the whole cabin to hear. It wasn't a warning, it was a performance. And Maya recognized it for what it was. She looked up, not flinching, not raising her voice. "Then you'll have to remove me," she replied. No tremble, no hesitation, just a line drawn in the carpet beneath her. Amanda blinked. Just once. The kind of blink that happens when someone realizes they no longer have control. Behind her, Robert Langston grunted in frustration and leaned back in his seat, like the whole situation was somehow an inconvenience to him personally. "This is unbelievable," he muttered. "We're going to be late because of this?" Across the aisle, Olivia Reed lifted her phone just a little higher. Steady now, her camera centered on Amanda's stiff frame and Maya's unwavering stillness. The video was streaming, not uploading, not saving for later, but going live. Within seconds, it had over 2,000 viewers. Comments started pouring in. Words like, "What is happening? Is she being kicked out for nothing?" And, "This is racial profiling live on a plane." Amanda didn't know it yet. Neither did Robert. But the world was watching now, and they weren't looking away. Lena Torres, still standing with the manifest in her hand, took a small step forward. Her voice cracked slightly as she spoke. "Captain Harris has been notified," she said. "He's coming to the cabin." Amanda turned sharply. "Who called the captain?" she asked, almost snarling. Lena didn't move. "He asked for an update," she replied, "and I gave it to him." At that moment, the cockpit door opened, and Captain Ronald Harris stepped into the aisle. Mid-50s, steel-gray hair, calm eyes. The kind of man who had flown through real turbulence and could still pour his own coffee with a steady hand. He scanned the cabin quickly and then looked at Maya. "Dr. Ellis," he said respectfully, "I understand there's been some confusion about your seat?" Maya nodded once. "No confusion. Captain, I'm in the right seat. I've been told I don't belong here. That's the only issue." Amanda stepped in, eager to regain control. "Captain, the passenger in 1A raised a concern, and I felt it appropriate to—" He held up his hand. "Thank you. Amanda, I'll take it from here." Amanda froze. Her mouth opened, then shut, for the first time. She didn't know what to say. The captain turned to Maya. "May I see your boarding pass?" She handed it to him without a word. He examined it briefly, then looked back to Amanda. 2A. Dr. Maya Ellis. No errors, no upgrades. This is her assigned seat. He turned to Robert Langston next. Mr. Langston, I understand you're uncomfortable. Would you prefer to move? Robert was stunned. Move? I've flown in 1A for 11 years. I'm platinum. The captain didn't blink. And you're welcome to continue doing so, but not at the expense of someone else's dignity. Olivia's live stream surged past 10,000 viewers. The chat exploded. Some were outraged, some in disbelief. Most were simply stunned that this was unfolding in real time. One commenter wrote, "This woman is pure grace. The airline better respond." Captain Harris gave Maya a small nod. "You are welcome to remain in your seat, Dr. Ellis, and you will not be disturbed again." Maya gave a soft nod in return. "Thank you." He turned back to Amanda. "I'd like a word in the galley." She followed him, stiffly, her shoulders drawn back like armor. As they walked away, Robert shook his head and mumbled again. 3 months ago, I knew this would happen again. Maya turned her head. For the first time, she addressed him directly. "You had something stolen from you," she said softly. "That's real. But blaming every black person you see for it, that's not justice. That's fear." Robert didn't respond, but his face changed, slightly, not softened. Not sorry, but shaken. Lena slowly walked up to Maya and knelt beside her seat. "That was the bravest thing I've seen in my life," she whispered. Maya looked at her and smiled gently. "No, it wasn't brave," she said. "It was necessary." Olivia turned the camera toward herself for a moment, her voice low. "This is happening right now. No yelling, no chaos, just quiet strength and public humiliation. But something tells me this flight will not take off the way it planned." At that moment, her phone buzzed. Her live stream had hit 25,000 viewers, and rising. She kept recording, not because it was content, but because it was truth, real, raw, and undeniable. The kind of moment that doesn't just go viral, but changes things. Across the aisle, Maya finally exhaled and turned to look out the window. The sky was still, the engines were quiet, but something had already shifted. Something bigger than turbulence. Something that couldn't be smoothed over by policy or PR. Because for the first time in that cabin, silence had taken a side, and it had chosen her. Now let me ask you, if you had been sitting there, just a few feet away from it all, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up? Or stayed silent? Because the truth is, these moments, they don't just happen on planes. They happen everywhere, every day. And whether you speak or don't, becomes part of the story. The cabin door remained open, but it was no longer just the jet bridge that kept the plane grounded. It was truth, hovering thick in the air like static before a storm. Captain Ronald Harris stood at the front of the aisle, clipboard in one hand, eyes sweeping over the first-class cabin not for turbulence, but for accountability. Dr. Maya Ellis sat upright in seat 2A, the calm in her spine unshaken, but her heart beating against years of practiced restraint. Amanda Greer stood nearby, arms stiff at her sides, her jaw locked, no longer hiding behind flight protocol or customer service scripts. Robert Langston, still fuming in 1A, looked toward the front of the cabin like a man desperate to make it to his boardroom on time, only to realize no one was impressed by his status here. Lena Torres, the junior attendant, stood quietly behind Maya now, no longer watching as a student, but as someone who had chosen a side. "Captain," Amanda began again, trying to sound composed. "This is setting a precedent we can't afford. When a passenger expresses discomfort, discomfort, Captain Harris interrupted, is not a valid reason to violate another passenger's rights. His voice wasn't loud. It was level, direct. It didn't need to rise. It just needed to land. And it did. Amanda's eyes flared with frustration, but she nodded as if accepting a technical correction, not a moral one. Meanwhile, back in seat 3B, Olivia Reed's live stream had crossed 40,000 live viewers. Her phone now clamped discreetly to the tray table in front of her, pointed straight ahead, capturing every frame. And in those frames, a story was being written that couldn't be undone. Maya reached for her phone quietly and texted Jillian. "Captain's here, holding firm. Might still need you." Jillian's response came in seconds. "Legal is watching. Press requests already coming in. Say the word." But Maya didn't want this to become a spectacle. She hadn't come on this flight to make headlines. She had come to deliver a keynote on equity. But somehow, her existence in 2A had turned into its own statement, and one she was no longer willing to minimize. The captain turned back to Robert. "Mr. Langston," he said calmly, "if you feel unsafe or dissatisfied, I'll gladly speak with the gate agent and help rebook your flight." Robert blinked. "I didn't say I wanted to be removed. I can't believe this is even an issue." "It's only an issue," the captain said, "because it was made one, not by her," he motioned gently toward Maya, "but by us." That word, us, hung in the air longer than anyone expected. Amanda turned to walk back toward the galley, and Lena followed. They disappeared behind the curtain, but the silence left behind was louder than any engine hum. A few rows back, a businessman leaned toward the aisle, glanced at Maya, then looked away quickly. But Maya had seen it, how some passengers were slowly shifting in their seats, not with disgust, but discomfort with themselves. Truth, when spoken plainly, has a way of reflecting on everyone in the room, and this room had mirrors everywhere. Captain Harris took a breath, then addressed the cabin at large. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said through the overhead intercom, "we're experiencing a brief delay due to an onboard matter that is being resolved. Thank you for your patience and professionalism as we work through it. We'll be moving shortly." He clicked the mic off and sat in the empty jump seat near the front, folding his hands in his lap, choosing not to leave, choosing, instead, to witness. Lena reappeared minutes later with a small glass of water and gently placed it on Maya's tray table. "It's probably not enough," she whispered, "but I wanted to offer something." Maya looked up at her with soft eyes. "You offered more than you think," she said. Lena nodded, then took a deep breath and stood straighter. At that moment, Olivia's stream jumped past 60,000 viewers in the chat. People began tagging media outlets, news anchors, even the airline's official account. The incident was no longer a private matter between gate agents and crew. It had become a national moment unfolding in real time. And Maya, who had spent her life earning rooms full of respect, was being reminded of how quickly perception can strip that away. Until someone says no from the far end of the cabin. A flight attendant reappeared with a message for Amanda, who had remained silent behind the curtain. She whispered into Amanda's ear, then left again. Amanda, jaw tight, stepped back into the aisle and approached Captain Harris. "Corporate just called," she said quietly. "They're aware." The captain looked up. "Good," he replied. "They should be." Amanda didn't reply. She simply turned and faced the cabin with a strained smile, as if she'd suddenly remembered they were all still watching. "We'll be departing shortly," she said flatly, but there was no warmth in her tone, no welcome, no dignity, just a thin layer of politeness painted over humiliation. Maya took a slow breath and leaned back in her seat. For the first time since boarding, she allowed herself to close her eyes for a moment. She hadn't moved. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't caused a scene. All she had done was insist on being treated like she belonged. And now, for better or worse, the cabin had been forced to decide whether it agreed with her, and so had the world, outside. The sunlight hit the window at just the right angle, and for a brief second, Maya saw her reflection in the glass, steady, whole, unapologetically still. Because this wasn't about a seat anymore. It was about what a woman had to prove just to sit in silence, and why some people would rather disrupt an entire flight than confront their own discomfort. But not today. Not this time. The plane still hadn't moved, but something else had. Something deeper. Something unspoken. The energy in the first-class cabin, once crisp with condescension, now felt heavy with reckoning, outside. The jet bridge remained connected, but inside. A shift had already begun. People weren't just looking at Dr. Maya Ellis anymore. They were seeing her, not as a disturbance, not as a story, but as a human being who had stayed exactly where she belonged. The silence wasn't uncomfortable now. It was reflective. The way silence feels when everyone knows they've witnessed something they can't quite explain, but will remember in detail. Maya didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply sat in 2A, her spine tall, her chin level, a quiet presence that filled more space than 1,000 loud words. Olivia Reed, still seated in 3B, looked at the stream running on her phone. The view count had passed 85,000. Comments flooded in from every corner of the country, a woman from Atlanta said. "I've never flown first class, but I know what it's like to be told I don't belong," a man in San Francisco wrote. "Watching this with my daughter. Thank you, Dr. Ellis," and another from Chicago simply said. "The strength in her silence is teaching us more than any speech could." And Maya didn't even know. She hadn't seen the numbers. She hadn't heard the commentary. All she knew was that the ground staff hadn't yet sealed the door. The captain hadn't given clearance. And something, some ripple she couldn't name, was holding this flight still, behind the curtain. Amanda Greer sat alone on the jump seat, her posture uncharacteristically slouched. She'd received a second call from corporate, not official disciplinary action, yet, but a directive: de-escalate, step back, and stop engaging. Amanda wasn't used to being told to stop, especially not by voices that questioned her judgment, especially not when she still believed she was right. She clung to the idea that she'd been doing her job, but somewhere, in the pit of her chest, a question she didn't want to answer had begun to form. What if she had made this personal without ever admitting it to herself? In the cockpit, Captain Harris sat back in his seat, watching the door. He didn't say much. He rarely did. But he had seen too many moments in the air where a choice had to be made. Not about safety, but about character. And this, he knew, was one of those moments. From his headset came a quiet voice from the gate. "Ready to close when you are, Captain?" He looked toward the aisle, saw Maya still in her seat, Lena standing nearby, Olivia's phone still angled forward. "Give me 2 more minutes," he replied. "Copy that." In row 4, a woman leaned over to the man beside her and whispered, "I feel like I'm in a courtroom and church at the same time." He nodded. She never raised her voice. That's what's so powerful. Olivia finally ended her live stream, not because the story was over, but because she knew it was about to change. She opened a new video on her phone, this one not live, but personal. She looked into the lens and whispered, "When we landed on the runway, we hadn't left the gate, but something took off in here. A truth, a reckoning, and we'll carry it long after this flight lands. She hit save, forwarded it to her editor, and put the phone down. Lena approached Maya again, this time kneeling by her armrest, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. I just wanted you to know, she said gently. When I applied for this job, I wrote that I wanted to help people feel safe and seen. Today, you're the one helping me feel that. Maya looked at her with warmth but said nothing right away. She placed her hand softly over Lena's and gave it the lightest squeeze. Then we're both where we're meant to be, she replied. At that moment, the intercom crackled again. It was Captain Harris. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are now preparing to depart. Cabin crew, please secure the door. Amanda stepped out from behind the curtain and nodded at the ground agent. The door closed with a thud, not loud, but final. The cabin lights dimmed. The plane hummed to life, but no one reached for magazines. No one adjusted their tray tables. They just sat, quiet, thoughtful. Maya looked out the window again, the late afternoon sun casting a long, slanted ray across her armrest. For the first time in a long time, she felt it, not just the seat beneath her, but the full weight of presence, not earned, not begged for, simply lived, and for the first time in this long afternoon. Robert Langston shifted, not in defiance, but in something closer to humility. He turned slightly toward her and said, just barely above a whisper, I'm sorry. I think I needed someone to show me I've been carrying something I thought I'd already put down. Maya didn't respond right away. She didn't rescue him with forgiveness, but she didn't scorn him either. She simply said, pain is real, but so is projection. We all have to decide which one we lead with. He gave a small nod. That was all. And somehow, it was enough. As the engines revved and the plane began to push back, Lena stood in the galley, watching the rows, her eyes stopping on 2A with something close to reverence. The aircraft moved, inch by inch, yard by yard, onto the taxiway. But everyone on board knew the real movement had already happened, and it hadn't come from the runway. It had come from a refusal, a quiet one, a necessary one, and in the echo of that refusal, something new had begun to rise, not policy, not protest, just presence and its undeniable power. The plane lifted from the runway as the sun slid low across the horizon, casting long golden lines across the polished surfaces of first class. Dr. Maya Ellis sat still in seat 2A, hands resting on her thighs, watching the clouds begin to gather beneath her like soft fields of silence. The roar of the engines faded into a hum, but no one in that cabin moved to relax. There were no champagne requests, no idle chatter, just a quiet so complete it felt like reverence for what they'd witnessed, for what they'd nearly allowed, and for the woman now seated calmly among them, who had said so little, yet changed so much. Amanda Greer walked the aisle slowly, no longer with the brisk confidence of authority, but with the strained decorum of someone who had been told to stand down. She checked seatbelts with robotic gestures, avoiding eye contact with Maya, and every time her gaze passed over 2A, her chest tightened. Not with regret, at least not yet, but with the weight of something she hadn't expected to feel. Consequence. Lena Torres followed behind her, performing the same checks, but with a different presence entirely. Lena was no longer walking the cabin as a trainee. Something in her had clicked into place. She wasn't proud of what had happened, but she was proud she hadn't stayed quiet. Maya noticed her pause by the aisle, and their eyes met for a beat. No words were exchanged, but gratitude doesn't always need sound. Back in 3B, Olivia Reed tapped out a message to her editor. Landing in D.C. soon. We'll send full story. This one, This isn't about drama. It's about dignity. Her live stream, which had ended just before takeoff, was now being clipped and shared across major social platforms. The video showed Amanda's tone, Robert Langston's accusation, the captain's resolve, Lena's quiet courage, and most powerfully, Maya's stillness, her refusal to move, not out of defiance, but out of something deeper, something called self-respect. The title of Olivia's post was simple. She sat still, and in just under 45 minutes, it had been viewed over 250,000 times. Commentators were already responding. Civil rights attorneys, airline analysts, even a former senator. The nation hadn't been expecting to talk about race, class, and presence today. But sometimes history isn't scheduled. Sometimes it takes flight from row 2A. Robert Langston hadn't spoken since his brief apology. Now, as the flight reached cruising altitude, he sat with his tray table down, fingers laced, looking nowhere and everywhere at once. His eyes were not restless, but haunted, because now he couldn't escape the memory of what he'd said, not the words, but the certainty behind them, the belief that Maya Ellis, accomplished, articulate, and seated exactly where her ticket placed her, was somehow a threat, and not because of who she was, but because of who he remembered. And that realization, once it settled, was more unsettling than he was ready to admit. The captain's voice returned over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude of 36,000 feet. Estimated arrival into Washington, D.C. is on schedule. We appreciate your patience earlier today and thank you for flying with SkyConnect." His tone was as smooth as always, but everyone on board knew that today's flight wouldn't be forgotten for its punctuality. Amanda returned to the galley and stood by the service cart, pretending to review checklists. She wasn't. She was watching Maya's reflection in the small metal cabinet door, watching her do nothing, watching her exist, and somewhere, deep under layers of professionalism and defensiveness, Amanda felt the smallest fracture in the wall she'd built around her certainty. Her rules had told her one thing, her instinct had told her another, and today, her instinct had been wrong. Meanwhile, Maya closed her eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to rest from the weight of it all. The adrenaline had passed, but the residue remained. She wasn't angry, she wasn't shaken, but she was tired. Tired of knowing that at 38 years old, after degrees, accolades, and decades of excellence, she still had to explain her right to sit down, still had to carry other people's discomfort like luggage she didn't pack, still had to be graceful, even when being wronged. But she didn't carry that weight with bitterness. She carried it with precision, with the understanding that dignity doesn't always win the room in a roar. It wins it in a whisper, a quiet stand, a refusal to vanish. Lena returned one final time, crouched slightly so she could speak privately. "Dr. Ellis," she said, voice soft. "I just wanted to say, I'll remember this flight. I'll remember you." Maya looked at her and smiled gently. "Good," she said. "But don't remember me. Remember what you did. You spoke. You stepped in. That matters more than you think." Lena's throat tightened. She nodded, rose, and returned to her post, no longer uncertain of who she wanted to be in a crisis. Just then, Maya's phone buzzed. It was a message from Jillian. "CNN just requested a comment. Videos everywhere now. Call me when you land." Maya didn't respond right away. She didn't care about the press. She hadn't asked for attention. She had simply refused to move. And somehow, that refusal had moved the world. Across the aisle. Robert glanced over again. This time he didn't speak, but his eyes held something different. Not guilt, not shame, but awareness. And for Maya, that was enough. For now. As the cabin lights dimmed and passengers adjusted their blankets, The flight continued like any other. Beverage service began. The clouds thickened below. But everyone on board knew. This wasn't like any other flight, because the facts would remain simple. There had been a seat, there had been a woman, there had been resistance, and there had been resolve. And let the record show. She never raised her voice. She didn't have to. The wheels touched down on the tarmac with a soft bounce. But the moment felt heavier than landing. SkyConnect Flight 482 had arrived in Washington, D.C., on schedule. Yet every passenger on board knew they hadn't just traveled miles. They had crossed a threshold, inside the cabin. No one clapped, no one cheered, and for once, no one rushed to unbuckle before the chime. It was as if they were all waiting for something else, something unspoken. Dr. Maya Ellis remained seated in 2A, her posture unchanged, her spirit intact, her silence now charged with meaning. She didn't look around. She didn't need to. She knew eyes were still on her, not with suspicion anymore, but with recognition. Amanda Greer stood stiffly near the galley, going through the motions of landing prep, her face unreadable, somewhere between discomfort and reflection. She had grown quieter since the confrontation, not in duty, but in presence, and while she hadn't apologized. Something in her had clearly shifted, like a door slightly cracked open in a room that had always been locked. Lena Torres, watching from behind the beverage cart, exhaled slowly as the plane taxied to the gate. She had never imagined that her first month as a flight attendant would include witnessing this kind of moment, one where policy collided with humanity, and she had chosen the right side. Olivia Reed had already drafted her post-flight statement. It read, "She didn't shout, she didn't curse, she didn't move, and somehow, she moved all of us." Her earlier live stream had now reached over 500,000 views, with news outlets already requesting interviews and high-profile voices calling for systemic change. But Maya hadn't touched her phone. She didn't board this plane looking to trend. She boarded to get to her keynote. And now, she just wanted to breathe. As the aircraft came to a complete stop, Captain Harris's voice returned over the intercom, warm, composed, and unmistakably deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Washington, D.C. On behalf of the crew, thank you for choosing SkyConnect, and thank you for your patience and your awareness. We hope today reminds us all that dignity isn't a policy, it's a principle." The cabin sat in stillness after that, as if those words needed to settle before anyone stood. When the seatbelt sign finally dinged, Maya reached for her bag, not with haste, but with intention. She stood slowly, adjusted her blazer, and turned to step into the aisle. Robert Langston remained seated in 1A, no longer looking at her like a threat, but like a man who had witnessed something he couldn't unsee. As Maya walked past him, he cleared his throat. "Dr. Ellis," he said quietly. She paused, turning only slightly. "Yes?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. The words didn't quite form, but what lingered in his eyes was no longer arrogance. It was humility. She offered a slight nod. That was enough. That's all it needed to be. As she reached the door, Amanda was standing to the side, hands clasped in front of her. Her posture was military straight, but her voice had lost its edge. "Thank you for flying with us, Dr. Ellis," she said, softly. Maya stopped. Not for long, just long enough to say, "I hope the next woman who looks like me won't have to explain why she's sitting where she belongs." Amanda nodded faintly. She didn't offer a reply, because there wasn't one that would be honest. Maya stepped off the plane and into the jet bridge, where the cool blast of terminal air hit her face like a release. Jillian stood waiting at the end, phone in hand, eyes wide. "Maya," she said, "they're already talking about this everywhere. CNN, MSNBC, even the airline's internal team. They're holding a press call at 6. Maya gave a half smile. Let them talk. I have a speech to give. Jillian grinned, both shaken and proud. They walked together toward the terminal exit. Behind them, passengers began to exit slowly, many glancing toward Maya's back as they walked. Not out of pity, not out of discomfort, but out of something closer to respect. Lena caught up, still in uniform, pulling her service cart behind her, and gently tapped Maya's arm. You were right, she said quietly. Silence isn't weakness. Maya looked at her one last time. And presence, she added, is power. Jillian called for their ride, and as they moved toward the curb, Maya finally pulled out her phone. Notifications scrolled like a flood. Press requests, public support, messages from strangers, calls from executives, but she didn't open any of them. Not yet. She opened her notes app instead, typed out one line. The title of her speech, This Seat Was Never Just a Seat. And she knew the audience in D.C. would hear it differently now. Because she wouldn't just be speaking from a stage, she'd be speaking from experience, from 36,000 feet above the ground, from a cabin where one refusal to be displaced had opened up a new path, for everyone who had ever been told. You don't belong here. That day. Maya Ellis didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand anything. She just stayed seated. And somehow, in doing so, she helped the world stand taller. Thank you for watching. If this story meant something to you, like it, share it, and subscribe.